Guerrerra. I'm the author of Morning Exchange, which you guys read, right? And if you don't, let me know. And I would like to thank you guys in the room. Thanks for coming. I'd like to thank all the people who are listening via the live stream and watching by the live streams. I'd like to, of course, thank our partner, Deutsche Börse, without whom this wouldn't be possible. A couple of housekeeping remarks before we get to the meat of the debate. We will have Q&A throughout the session, and then at the end, so you're warmly encouraged to ask questions. We'll have people with mics around, so please ask questions. Just tell us who you are, who you work for, and then ask the question, and keep the question succinct if possible. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult. We have this thing called the Twitter wall. It's to encourage you guys to tweet, and you can see that the tweets scrolling as we go along. Please use the hashtag Morning Exchange. And then at the end, please fill the evaluation forms. They're very important to judge how we can improve these events and tell us what you like and what you didn't like. So without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage the CEO of Deutsche Börse, Carsten Kenteger, for a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for indulging me for a few moments, Commissioner Guersent, Francesco. I'd like to just spend a couple of moments before the main event begins to explain something that I find important. I'll begin with a question here. What is the European Union's Capital Markets Union all about? What is it for? On one level, this answer is extremely simple. It is to help the European economy grow. What does that actually mean in practice? Despite the relaxed monetary policies that we've seen over the last few years, the SMEs in Europe have still been facing a credit crunch. The funding bottleneck is apparent to all of us. They cannot get enough money to start. They can't get enough money to grow. This is now becoming a matter of utmost urgency, in our opinion. A recent investment bank report highlights this in contrast to the UK and the US in terms of the euro area statistically lagging behind quite considerably. To point that out further, the US took 2.5 years, 2.5 years to reach the pre-crisis, pre-2008 real GDP levels. The UK took 5 years to do the same, and the Eurozone is still languishing to reach the pre-crisis levels. Even more worryingly, the IMF has come out with the potential growth figures for those areas where the euro area is posted by the IMF at a potential growth of 1.5%, the UK and US both at 2.5%. As I said, I think the growth needs new and young SMEs. CMU, Capital Markets Union, can help overcome exactly this bottleneck, can help those SMEs to thrive. How? We do know that innovation is the mainspring of economic growth. Therefore, innovation and entrepreneurs are the ones who bring innovation, are what we must have and desire. Which leads us to the fundamental question: is there a way to incentivize entrepreneurship and innovation? Here my answer is most emphatically yes, there is a way. If you talk to innovators and entrepreneurs, what they need absolutely most is a network of bridges towards capital markets and to investors. And capital markets and investors, in turn, need that network of bridges towards innovative entrepreneurs. Who is best placed to build these bridges? Neutrally, you guessed it, market infrastructure providers, because we build them in line with the regulatory backdrop, with the regulatory environment that we live in. In fact, Deutsche Börse, we've done quite a lot of things in the run-up to CMU, because real economy and the support of that real economy is an integral part of our mission and has been for many years. This is, just as a reminder, not to replace banks at all. The banks are playing a wonderful intermediation role, but it is to supplement them and assist them in playing that role and continuing to play that role. What is important, though, in this context is to think about this in a pan-European approach type of way. And the pan-European approach includes the UK. And that is because of Brexit and not in spite of Brexit. The benefits of a single market, if you look at the theory and practice empirically, the benefits of a single market stem from allocating savings to their most efficient uses over the largest area possible, therefore, in our case, the European scale. Standards, rules, legal frameworks must be applied on a pan-European basis to support cross-border activity, which is necessary to allocate those savings on a European scale in the most efficient fashion. So those standards, of course, must include all the things that we've been talking about. Some action has also been taken: disclosure requirements, insolvency rules, and the like. A strong, competitive, cross-border market infrastructure that can then support those standards and can support the cross-border financial markets across Europe is what is needed. And the planned merger that we are discussing, and that I'm indeed here to mention to you today as well, between the London Stock Exchange Group and Deutsche Börse Group, would create just such an infrastructure. It would create the capacity to finance SMEs. That capacity does not exist right now. It would underpin systemic stability for Europe and European capital markets as well, something that's dear to all of our heart after what we've experienced 8 years ago. How? One of the arguments that I think I sometimes hear against the merger is based on a misapprehension about the status of the CCPs involved in the merger from both sides, the London Stock Exchange Group and Deutsche Börse, in that people think they are going to be operationally combined. They will not be operationally combined. They will remain operationally separate. But, importantly, they are in a common corporate structure. And being in a common corporate structure, transparency will be increased. There will be improved real-time risk monitoring, and there will be enhanced regulatory oversight. All of those significantly adding to systemic stability. In conclusion, by engendering a Europe-wide innovation culture, by eradicating the funding bottleneck that I talked about, by providing for the cross-border liquidity pools that are necessary to drive SMEs, and by increasing systemic stability, this merged infrastructure can bring the foundations for CMU to provide for a future financial resurgence of the euro area. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the debate.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Olivier. Thank you, Carsten. Thank you for being with us. Let's start, if I may, on a topical, this will become available. Yes, we all want to hear from you.
Okay.
We definitely all want to hear from you.
Yeah.
So.
Very good.
So let's start on a topical issue. Yesterday was an eventful ECOFIN, and we heard from a lot of finance ministers criticizing, for various reasons, the proposals by the Commission on the banking package. How would you respond to some of those criticisms?
Well, I think the key words in what you just said, Francesco, is for various reasons. Let's contextualize first. What is it we're doing is, you can see it from two perspectives, really. One is we are putting in place the part of the unfinished business in Basel that is already decided. As you know, there is a part that is not yet decided and on which Europeans have views, and we are discussing them, and we made good progress last week in Santiago de Chile. So it's important that the Basel framework is completed. It's important that we have a leverage ratio in place, that we complete our liquidity rules, etc. Another thing is we're doing it because, as you know, in what I would refer to as the Dutch roadmap towards the completion of the banking union, which was adopted under Dutch presidency in June, we have a path forward from where we are now, an incomplete stage of the banking union, to steady phase around 2025, 2026. And that's very good news because before that, if you had asked all the ministers around the table, what do you want to be in the steady state, you would have had pretty much the same answer for everybody. Everybody agrees what the steady stage of banking union should look like, roughly. Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask the question, how do we go from where we are now to there, then you would have had a bunch of very different answers. And crafting a roadmap on which everybody agreed, from here to there, was very good news. And the first step in that roadmap was the package, because it delivers very substantial risk reduction package. So this is what this package is. Why is it criticized and on which grounds? Well, for the same reason you would have had very different answers on how to go there. People criticize the paper for being either under-ambitious or over-ambitious on various parts, depending on what is their view about what the ideal path is. And that's sort of normal. What that suggests to me is that we are not too much off mark in terms of pitching the proposal. Because now, of course, all these various criticisms will have to be confronted in a discussion in Council, in working groups, and we'll see what the final center of gravity shall be. Let me take a couple of these criticisms. Well, some tell us that we are arguably fragmenting by suggesting that there should be, for big international banks not homed in the EU, intermediate holding companies in order to ensure the resolvability for the EU operations under a certain number of conditions, having at least 2 subsidiaries, reaching the threshold for significant institutions. Mm-hmm. So we're talking really about big animals, sufficiently big for that when they are homed in the EU, we consider them significant institutions and put them under direct supervision by the ECB. But some others tell us that we shouldn't defragment the Eurozone by empowering the SSM to use the waiver that Basel allows for jurisdictions to decide when appropriate, that it's not necessary to segregate capital and liquidity in subsidiaries within one jurisdiction, which is something that is good for an efficient allocation of capital and liquidity. And you immediately see that these two criticisms have at least different, if not opposite, rationale. Yeah. And all these things will have to be discussed, and I'm very confident that we will end up somewhere in the middle. And I'm quite confident that our initial proposal is somewhere in the middle. So maybe we will not reach the exact same middle. That's the thing about negotiation. Don't forget there is the Parliament. The Parliament usually tends to have, almost by definition, more a view of what it believes to be the general interest of the EU than the sum of the individual interests of the member states, and that will also play a role in what this package would look like in the end of the day. We have also opposite criticisms for people that think we should have changed the fundamental balance of BRD for the resolution of bank by making the 8% threshold a sort of hard floor, which it is not, and it is not for, in our view, good reasons. And others are criticizing us for not capping the ability of resolution authorities to impose higher level or even much higher level of MRELs where necessary. And again, we bend neither to the ones or to the others. What we think is that there are good reasons why the co-legislators deciding that there should be flexibility in the MREL, and that 8% is necessary to access the fund, but 8% is not something that you should necessarily have at all time in your bank. At the same time, we think it is important that resolution authorities have the ability, when they think that a specific bank deserves a specific treatment, even if it goes far above, or actually below 8%, that it can do it, providing it is able to justify this decision on the basis of its analysis of the situation of that bank.
So, but you're not worried that the political process in the EU being what it is, there is a danger that the package will be diluted out of recognition because there's so many conflicting interests in the process?
Well, one of the advantages of being old is you've lived through a number of situations already. So I'm in this business since the end of 2009.
Yes.
I've lived through BRD, original BRD, the CRD4, et cetera, And you know, Francesco, the situation we face today is not anything new. If you remember the comments when Mr. Barnier in his days presented CRD4, we were criticized by everybody, and in very different ways as well. And in the end of the day, I think we have a CRD4 that is fairly consistent and is a good regulation. So no, I'm quite confident. Everybody is flexing its muscles at the moment, which is normal in a negotiation. And then we'll start to work technically. Some misunderstandings will dissipate. Some technical solutions will be found. And I don't have any reason to believe that the standard will be diluted in the end of the day. I think a number of the key players here are very keen it not to be diluted.
I don't think you're old, by the way. I don't think you're old.
I'm all in that business.
You're using it as a rhetorical thing, right? So since you did mention Basel, there's a colleague of mine in the audience, Fiona Maxwell, who has a question on Basel, if you don't mind. If we have a microphone. Do we have microphones? For Fiona sitting here in the third row, yeah. Since that's another topical issue, as you said.
Hi, Fiona Maxwell from POLITICO.
No, I made sure your microphone doesn't work, so that.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
Hello? Oh, yes. Yeah, so it's a question on finalisation of Basel III or Basel IV, depending on what you want to call it. So the head of the Basel Committee said there will still be an agreement by the end of the year, despite the major meeting in Chile not being fully successful last week. So firstly, do you think the timeframe is still feasible? And secondly, do you think the EU will get what it wants from the talks?
Well, first, let me say that I think this is the position of all the EU representatives around the Basel table, so the EU member states that are represented there and the Commission and also EBA, that it is desirable to have international standards in banking. And it is desirable that they are complied with by the various jurisdictions, because, I mean, it's not too long ago that we knew the price of having comparatively weak standards and applied in very different ways by the supervisors across the world. So we have not forgotten that. We have faithfully implemented the G20 roadmap on the Basel III agreement, and we think it is important that it is faithfully implemented by everybody and in full. So yes, we need to have an agreement. It is important, and it would be bad news if we don't get an agreement by the end of the year or the beginning of next year. If I remember correctly, I will have the pleasure to spend my first weekend of January in Basel, which is the next GHOS meeting. So I think we stand a reasonable chance to get an agreement at this meeting or before. Because indeed, a number of progresses have been made in Santiago de Chile. And we are moving forward towards what was the initial roadmap given to the Basel Committee, which was to reduce the excessive variability of RWAs. And it is important to reduce excessive variability of RWAs. But what does that mean? That means that a given risk profile in two jurisdictions should be broadly dealt with the same way. And that was not the case so far, and that's why it was important to undertake that job. What that doesn't mean is that you should deal in the same way, whatever the risk profile is. And to caricature or simplify, this is the debate we have had. We believe, for example, the credit risk portfolio in European banks do not display the same risk profile as in other banks throughout the world. And what we have been doing, it's maybe a good example of what could happen in Council, referring to your previous question, is instead of having a very ideological discussion under the chairmanship of Stefan Ingves, we had gone into each portfolio. And we have looked at facts, and most of the time we have found agreements. So this work is not completed. There are still a number of points on which we disagree, which leads me to your second question. You never get everything you want in a negotiation. Otherwise, it's not a negotiation. So we will probably not get everything we want, but we have a fair idea of what is the minimum we need to get in order to be able to agree. I think our partners have also a good appreciation of this, and I have no reasons to believe we will not reach there. And if you ask me what is this appreciation, I will not answer that question.
There's always been, though, just for a quick follow-up, there's always been the perception that if you were really unhappy with the final deal, which you may not be, you would just not implement the bits that you don't like. And is that still a viable solution? Is just a leveraging portion of your negotiation?
Well, again, it's always better to have an international standard you're so happy with that you can faithfully apply it in full, and so can everybody around the world. Because there is a cost, even in small differences, that is clear. And this is therefore the target. This said, international standards are not Godspells. They're setting by people that are neither elected nor responsible in front of citizens. And they need to be transformed into legislation, not only in Europe, in every jurisdiction, in order to be implemented. And guess what? Ministers, and in our case, European MEPs, but in the case of the US congressmen, etc., well, they believe they've been elected to decide what is best for their economy, their citizens, etc. And if they disagree, they change. If you remember, when we finalized the Basel III package, we were criticized by the Basel Committee for not having been totally to the comma faithful in every aspect, although the deviations were pretty small, to be frank. And there was a very clear reaction by the European Parliament. Said, well, thank you very much, regulators in Basel. We've been elected to make the laws in the European Union, and this is what we've been doing. And our judge are our citizens. This said, of course, as I said previously, it is desirable to be able to implement in full when you have a real disagreement on one point, it would be better if it's a small point. I don't think it's a problem to deviate either if you think that this specific thing is not well suited for your economy. And I think for this we have a pretty aligned position. You've seen the 2 successive statements of the Council of Ministers. The European Parliament adopted a resolution, and my Vice President, Valdis Dombrovskis, I think has been pretty clear. But deviating from Basel is not an objective of EU policy. It may be an undesirable consequence of having, in some aspects, a standard that we think is ill-suited for Europe.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions on the Capital Markets Union, and then we're going to open for the first set of Q&A on this topic we just discussed, the Banking Union, Basel, and the CMU. So if you have any questions, prepare them now, and then I'll come to you in a second. Then we'll also go to Twitter, see if there's any questions on Twitter. So on the Capital Markets Union, why is it taking so long?
I love that question. So that's the only thing for which I have brought some material.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, let me change rules. Let me quiz you, Francesco. Do you remember when we adopted the action plan for Capital Market Union?
When it was? Yeah,
it was on 16th September last year.
Yeah, last year, yeah.
14 months ago. And do you remember how many actions were foreseen?
60-something?
36.
Okay.
We're very, we want to deliver, so we're commensurate.
Yeah.
And do you happen to know how many are either ongoing or completed?
No.
33.
Okay. But how many completed? Ongoing and completed?
Completed all these that were depending on the Commission only,
right.
And ongoing all these that necessitate co-legislators, which is not meant to be a sort of hidden criticism to co-legislator, because 14 months in terms of legislating times is short. And we, of course, would have wished that it would go quicker. We're unhappy with the Council for having been, in our view, a bit slow on the prospectus. We're unhappy with the Parliament for having, in our view, been a bit slow on the STS securitization project. But all in all these moves, we have reasonable hopes that we can conclude an agreement on prospectus before the end of this year, and that we will be able to conclude an agreement on STS early next year. So I would strongly contest that it has been slow. Now, the Commission itself, in its communication of 14 September this year, so almost precisely a year after, I said, well, still, it hasn't been slow. It has been actually quite quick, but it needs to go even quicker, bolder, stronger. And that we're convinced of. I agree very much, at least with that part of Carsten's statement at ignition of this session, that we need a capital market union, and the capital market union needs a number of other measures that the ones that have been already put in place or are ongoing. But what people have to understand is that capital market union is not a magic stick. It's not something simple. It's about, first of all, understanding and then trying to fix. Why is it that we have, call it whatever you want, but let me refer it as a market failure in the EU, which means that we seem to have a difficulty to connect to the extent desirable our savings, which are abundant, with our long-term needs, which are abundant as well. But of course, part of the savings translate into long-term investment. Fortunately, not enough. And the whole point is to manage to redirect a bigger part of these savings onto long-term productive investment. But this does not depend only on the performance of stock exchange. This depends on many, many channels, some of which works okay, some of which works good, some of which works bad, some of which work in some member states, not in others. So the first thing to do was to understand where are the bottlenecks, where are the problems, why? Why is it that private placement works very well in UK, France, Germany, far less well in a number of other countries? And the answer to this, that's a good example, by the way, because the answer to this is not a nice, bright piece of EU legislation. Because when you study the situation, you see that private placement in France works very well with completely different conditions than in Germany. And Germany and France themselves are completely different conditions than the UK. So in reality, that means that you don't have a single model for it to work. There are several, and that depends probably on how adapted your model is to the local conditions. So there is no one-size-fits-all probably for private placement. Conversely, that means that other member states, which suffer for a deficit in this field, should try to understand, and we should help them, what could work best for them. Maybe by taking elements of any of the three models, copying one of the three, whatever. For other things, we need to have legislation. For a third category, the problem are in idiosyncratic national barriers to investment. And one of the things that makes is a low noise action that we have very regular meetings with representatives of all the member states where we discuss the problems in having adequate flows of capital in each of their member states from the point of view of the investors. So the investors report, this is the problem we encounter when we want to invest in Belgium, right, France, wherever. Then we take that up with that member state, with all the others, technical level, and then maybe the German guy around the table says, well, we had the same problem, this is how we fixed it. And what I mean to say is we want to fix the national barriers. First of all, we want to identify them, then we want to fix them. But my strong belief is if you end up bringing an infringement against a member state for infringement to the free flow of capital, you have lost the battle. Because that means you have not convinced that member state that it should find, either it should dismantle that barrier or it should find a more proportionate way to reach its public policy objective. And okay, you can put it to court, and the court will tell you in 3, 4, 5 years that you were right, but you will not fix the problem. So that's one of many, many, many examples of what we're doing. And I can tell you, it will take time. And this is why what President Juncker asked Lord Hill to do at Ignition was to have put in place by 2019 the basic blocks for it to work. And even that is challenging. But once the blocks will be in place, it's not the Commission that will make investment flow. The market will have to appropriate the new structures. We probably have to conduct some kind of new call for evidence things because we probably make mistake. And the market will tell us, well, look, you thought this would work, it doesn't, and this is why. And then the market will need to make this new structure work so that we have a bigger and more diverse flow of financing for our industry.
You mentioned one specific issue. I think the Parliament is voting today on the securitization package. The Commission proposed a 5% retention. The rapporteur said 20%. What is the range that you could live with that will ensure that securitization will be revived in the European Union? Securitization which is much needed in the European Union.
I'll answer your question in a way that you will not like, because I will not tell you above 15%, nothing's possible. No. The range I could live with is the range at which there is a market. This is frankly setting the retention rate at the rate at which there is no market, because nobody will ever do it. Well, let's drop the project. Yeah. I mean, so either if the retention rate that is minimally acceptable by some in terms of safety is above what the market can take in terms of cost, we will have a legislation that will be of no use because STS will never take up. So the simple answer to your question, if any rate at which there is a market and it works, is fine for me. We proposed 5% because we thought 5% is both appropriate in terms of managing the incentive of banks to manage the risks associated to their portfolio, and a reasonable cost for them to be interested in launching these products. In this field, as in many other, there is no absolute truth. So 5 might not be any better than 4 or 6 or 7. So that means it's not a holy figure. Mm-hmm. We think 20 is too high. We have said it repeatedly. And we think it's difficult to imagine there is a market at 20. But now the good news is that let's see what they do, but that the Parliament seems to be in a position to vote on a text, and that therefore the trialogue can start. On the trialogue, a new negotiation will start, and we will see what is the outcome.
Final question on CMU, and then we'll open up to. And I know you don't want to talk about Brexit for obvious reasons. By the way, don't even try to ask a question about Brexit, because it just wastes time. But can the project work without the biggest capital market in Europe?
Yes. Well, you're right. I don't want to talk, and I will not talk about Brexit. But it is true that Capital Market Union was conceptualized at a moment when we thought we would have the biggest capital market, certainly in Europe, maybe in the world, depends on who you talk to, at the heart of the European Union and at the heart of the Capital Market Union. Now, if this changes, the truth is nobody knows how it will change and to what extent. So, and I suppose the answer to your question depends very much on this. I have no better idea than anybody else that reads the newspapers, whether it will be, as I think Mrs. May said, blue, yellow, or red Brexit.
She said black, white, or grey. So.
Yeah, but I'm more colorful.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, of course it can work. Of course it can work. I mean, I think irrespective of Brexit, there is a need for the continent to grow the share of the funding through capital markets.
Fair enough.
And there is a need for the continent because we cannot, and let me be clear about that, it's not about decreasing bank funding. It's not this at all. I mean, if we could, we would increase bank funding, but we will decrease more capital funding for 3 reasons. One is that we need to increase the level of potential growth in Europe, and that you cannot do if you do not increase the funding, and in particular the funding of innovation. And the funding of innovation is primary. Of course you need a bank and you need a credit line, but you need equity. Yeah. And so you need capital market funding. We need also to grow capital market funding because we need to increase resilience. And we've seen, and painfully, in 2008, 2009, 2010, that when you're depending 70% on banks for your funding, if the banking system is sick, the whole economy is sick. Yeah. So we need to rebalance this as well for reason of resilience.
So let's take some questions. Please keep it to these topics because we have other topics to talk about. And keep your question short. Paul. There is.
Thank you. Paul Goldschmidt, retired from the European Commission. It seems to me that your description has been not a capital markets union, but a union of capital markets. Your whole description, and I think that there's a basic misunderstanding. The 36 measures could very well have been done within the FSAP of 2002. It's a prolongation of that. I do not see it at all as a capital markets union. Second quick point, it seems to me that as structured and as was described in the Green Paper, banks are at the center of the construction of the capital markets union. You say that it is a question of not decreasing their lending, but that increasing the funding by the markets. But it seems to me that there's a fundamental conflict of interest if in Europe we keep the universal banking model and let the banks just choose which clients they will fund and which they will try to pass on to the market.
Do you want to address those points?
Yeah, sure. The first point, I think, is a fair point. Part of the capital market union, arguably a great part, are things that we failed to achieve in the past, notably in the late 90s, you're absolutely right, when my friend David Wright tried to get what was called at the time the Financial Services Action Plan, which is trying to obtain a genuine single market for capital. That is absolutely true. But this is also more than this. I mean, the choice that was made, and that has to do with the fact that the city was at the core of it, is that unlike banking union, and maybe the similarity of names is confusing, banking union is an institutional construction on a floor that is the rule book for all 28 member states. And this is not what capital market union is. Capital market union is not a single supervisor in the Eurozone that would implement rules for capital markets for the EU 28. By the way, we have a single rule book for capital markets, EMIR, MIFID, IFMD, etc. So that's not this. And the reason for this is very simple, is that the level of interaction between banks and sovereign and the level of interaction amongst member states in capital markets was by far lower than in the banking system. And therefore, from these differences of initial situations, we drew different conclusions. The end point might be this, actually might be a true CMU for 28 with single everything. But as I think Lord Hill put it when he was, another accusation at the time was not that we were too slow, but that we were under-ambitious with capital market union. And Lord Hill answered, and I think that's a very good answer. Well, do you want me to be ambitious? Very simple. Let's have a single supervisor, a single securities law, and a single insolvency law. And I'm ready to put all this on the table in 3 months.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck for 15 years.
Yeah.
Is that ambitious? No. It's the best way to kill the thing. So you need to walk before you run, is basically the philosophy of capital market union. There is a lot to do in order to build these transnational capital markets within the EU. If we manage this, that will be already something. Secondly, the banks are at the heart. That is very true, but they're not at the heart of capital market union. They're at the heart of capital financing now. I said that 70% is bank lend. Mm-hmm. Okay, bank lending is 70% of the financing of our economy. What are the remaining 30%? Well, 70% of this 30% is capital financing intermediated by banks. Yeah. So capital financing, non-intermediated by bank, is 10%. And this is what we should massively grow. So, does that call into question the universal bank model? That's a very ideological question. You may think yes. We, on the basis of the report of Eki Liikanen, have reviewed that, and we think not. We think that a well-managed universal banks is a perfectly proper and quite effective way of financing your economy. And I don't see anything wrong with the fact to use depositors' money to do market financing. I actually think that this is quite effective. Of course, to take depositors' money to do speculation is something slightly different, and own account speculation is even yet something very different. And we've taken measures in order to avoid that. But as you put it, do we put into question the universal bank model? No, we don't. Proudly so. And I think that's it.
That was it, yeah. Can I ask you, just to change subject very quickly, Trump. So the noises...
I'm sorry, but I didn't foresee that question.
So the noises coming from the US are very much deregulatory noises, right? Repeal Dodd-Frank, change things, make it easy for banks. How difficult will the climate be if that is indeed the path that they take, especially because you guys are going in a different direction?
Well, first of all, well, let's see. Mr. Trump has said many things during the campaign. He has said many other things since he's president-elect, and he may say still other things when he'll be president in place, which is not meant to be a criticism. I observe often the case that people campaigning do not say exactly what they do when they are confronted with the tough reality of power. So I think the US and the EU have been the key driving force in putting forward the G20 agenda. And we know why we do it. We know exactly why we did it. It is because the 2009 crisis, which was widely, in my view, the result of a triple failure. A failure of regulation, so that was the result of 30 years of deregulation. A failure of supervision, because supervisors in these times of deregulation were not so well considered, not equipped with the instruments they should have had. So this is sort of side-by-side product of deregulation, and a failure of the internal governance of financial institutions. And without these triple failures, we wouldn't be where we are now. And the G20 agenda, if you look at it, and if you look at the regulations we've put in place in Europe in order to comply with it, is about addressing these three failures. I think, even by American standards, it's a bit too early to forget that. It might be as well that, as always, the pendulum that went far too far in one direction might have gone a bit too far in the other in some aspects. And maybe that needs to be corrected. But all in all, we think that the regulatory framework that has been put in place on both sides of the Atlantic and elsewhere in the world as a result of the G20 agenda is basically, first of all, appropriate. And secondly, irrespective of whether it is appropriate or not, in its last detail, its biggest value is that it applies everywhere. Finance is global. And finance benefits from global rule, but we as citizens benefit from global rules because we're better protected against potential excesses. So I don't think the Americans have forgotten this. And therefore, they may make adjustments to their system, but I don't really believe they will massively roll back on what they've been doing.
Okay.
And actually, you start to see people relatively close to Mr. Trump in the US that are saying that there is no plan to undo Dodd-Frank massively. And this is what I strongly believe. That they will change things here and there, fine. We also change things here and there because we see that we went too far here. This is too complicated. This is too bureaucratic. This serves no purpose. When you so massively regulate in such short time, you're bound to do mistakes. And I think if you see you have done mistakes and they have a material effect on the functioning of the market, you should correct them.
So we have about 5 minutes for all your questions. So we'll be highly selective. So lady here in the third row here.
Arlene.
Arlene McCarthy. I work for Bloomberg, and I used to be an MEP on the committee and worked very closely with you, Olivier, and really appreciated much of the work that you did there with Michel Barnier and then with Lord Hill. I wanted to ask you about green finance and what's the philosophy behind that, why you've suddenly turned your attention now to setting up an expert group around sustainable finance. What's the potential capacity, do you think, in this area? Are we going to get investors very excited about this? Will it help the Capital Markets Union, effectively?
Well, that's a very good question. We are very small organizations with many things to do, but still we are at the moment trying to reorient part of our workforce in order to do two things, which we need to crucially understand if we want to take the right decisions. And these are everything that is at the intersection of IT and finance, so not only fintechs, but many other things. And indeed, I would say sustainable finance, a bit more than green. It's green as well, but it's not only green. Well, the market has not been waiting for us. I mean, I'm impressed to see that not only you have, the sort of traditional institutional investors you would expect to take a socially responsible view about their investments, but people like BlackRock, so completely private, and other funds start to market green or sustainable products, and they find clients for this that are interested in it, not only because it's socially good, but because it is economically rewarding as well. So this said, what is it we can do, and why? What are we now growing big in this? Well, first we have to see that the regulatory framework is not an impediment to the development of sustainable finance, or where it is an impediment, this is for good reason. And again, we need to do exactly what we ask the member states to do. If we have a rule that is here for a good reason but happens to be an impediment to the development of sustainable finance, we have to think how to reach a public policy objective without being an impediment to sustainable financing. So we need to critically review what we've been doing. We need also to align, and when I say align, I mean the Commission, the supervisors, the member states, because one of the problems of Europe in international standard setting, and international standard setting is very relevant to the take-up of sustainable finance, is that we do not wait because we're several. We don't speak with one voice usually. And actually, the reason why everybody talks about what happens in Basel these days, it is because for the first time, at least for the first time since I'm in that business, the Europeans, with one voice, said what they wanted and what they didn't want. And you see that when this happens, it makes an immediate difference, because we are the biggest financial area in the world. So when we say, no, we think this is not the good solution, together, it's fine. Of course, when in the past, some are here, some are there, and the rest of them in the middle, not only we don't wait, but we don't wait anything. And that goes for everything. That goes for accounting standards, that goes for disclosure, that goes for reporting, that goes for et cetera, et cetera. That goes for insurance. And in all
I want to give the chance for one more question, because otherwise
Fine.
They'll kick us out.
I think you got me.
Thank you. There, yeah.
Tanguy Van der Werf from AFME. I was wondering whether you could give us an update of where you are with the ESA's review, in particular when it comes to the funding, governance, and possibly new powers of ESMA.
It's a difficult question for me because I have a meeting this afternoon with my cabinet to discuss this. And I know they're eagerly watching me on TV at the moment. And I have a slight doubt that they would like it to learn from the broadcast what we plan to do. So if you would come back to me in 2 weeks' time, that I would appreciate.
Well ducked. If it's short, though.
It's very short, yes. We keep seeing Commissioner Moscovici pushing for an FTT. Do you think this is helpful in a wider CMU context?
That's loaded.
So you want me to be short? Very.
Okay. Very helpful.
Very helpful.
Okay. Very good.
I mean, it is very obvious that the broader the area on which you apply an LTT, the best it works. So does that mean you shouldn't do it in a more restricted area? Not necessary. I think the idea is good, but as you see from the long negotiations, the putting into place is challenging. I don't necessarily think it contradicts capital market union. So, I mean, this whole idea that taxing finance is an impediment to effective functioning of market, I don't buy.
On that note, I just want to thank Olivier. Stay seated for a second. So I just want to tell you, this is how I'm going to thank him, right? So if you live in London like I do, you mostly hear unkind things about commission officials, but mostly hear not very good things in meetings and dinner. So I often defend the commission by saying there's a lot of hardworking, smart, competent people. And the answer is often, there's a theoretical thing. You don't know what you're talking about. You're defending a theory. And then I say, but I know one person that is like that, actually exists, you know, and I mention him, right? He doesn't know this, but I mention him. So now he's becoming a figure of hate in the UK. Huge figure, because I go around saying he's the embodiment of the Brussels project. So with that note, please thank him, give him a big round of applause for being so open. And I would like to thank Deutsche Börse and Carsten in particular for being a partner on this. Thank you very much. And then please fill your evaluation forms. Thank you so much for coming, and we have a breakfast and a reception just right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.